Right. Thanks so much for joining in, Simone. Just for the purposes of obviously recording, we do record all sessions, just to let you know, so that they can, at some point in time later, be shared in case if it's required. We're going to be starting off the first unit today, which is operations management, and I'm going to try and cover the learning outcome 1. But before we start, what I'm going to try and do is also give you a slight overview of operations management and the reasons of why we are looking at doing this unit. And the last thing which I would probably just quickly go through with you is with regards to the way we have laid out the course material on Moodle. So if you have any questions in the middle, just feel free to ask me. And what I'm going to do is got on my Mac a couple of windows that we've opened. So I'm going to switch between windows just to look at a bit of a screen space. And then as we go along, it should just be, I think you'll find it okay in terms of, going through some of the stuff.
Yeah, fine. I'll try not to speak too much unless I have to, because I know there's a little bit of a delay on it, so I don't want to confuse anything. But if you ask me something or if I need a question, I'll just speak then.
That's absolutely fine. I can hear you absolutely clearly. There is no delay at my end, and I think it should be the same at your end. If you have any delay in hearing me, or obviously, then what I'm going to do is obviously I'm on the fiber here, so I don't think it should be a problem. But in case if it is, then I'll switch over to a different Wi-Fi, or to a different connection, so that there is no issue.
Yeah, no, it sounds fine. Last time there was a little bit I could hear a little bit of feedback, but it's fine now.
That's great. I think it was to do with because I did that session from home, and because my kids were with me, so I totally forgot to record. But that's fine. I think it should be okay. Now, what we've done is, and that just very briefly, we've laid out the course on the Moodle, as you can see on the screen. What you will also get to see is I've had a bit of a discussion with the tutor, Anjum. He's actually going to be picking up his daughter, and I think he might join us for a couple of minutes towards the fag end of the session. So between me and him, we're going to be looking at delivering some of the units, and we've kind of made up a plan which, hopefully should be available to you this weekend on the global calendar as well, because we've done some scheduling of the sessions. Now, operations management is a unit that I'm going to start with, and for this, what I've done so far is I put in a specific book, which is a Pearson's publication book by Nigel Slack, and we've got some presentation slides from there. So what we've done is we've divided them up into the 3 LOs so far. There is LO4, which is currently, I'm just kind of rehashing some of the slides, and I'll have that put in by close of play today. So that should cover the full unit. You'll have one additional book that we're going to load onto Moodle, which will also happen by today evening. And this will primarily cover and focus more on the learning outcome 3 and 4. But these are concise handbooks. They are obviously standard Pearson publications. And what you will get to see is you'll pretty much have full coverage of the content that we're going to cover in the unit on the PowerPoint slides, and to a certain extent, with regards to the indicative content or the tasks that have been set out by ATHE.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is, obviously, just before we start, there's a neat little introduction video, which is a quick video that I picked up from YouTube and kind of summarizes, the role of operations management very neatly in about a 60-second video. So I'm going to play that for a second, and then what we will do is we will discuss a couple of things to go into the learning outcome one.
Today I'll talk about operations management. In our day-to-day lives, we routinely deal with both physical goods as well as services. But where do these products or services come from? This is where operations management comes into play. Looking closely at the production of such goods, we're able to take a peek inside the black box, which is the production process. Operations management can be defined as the management of the entire process that transfers inputs into outputs. Outputs are said physical goods or services. Inputs can be material, manpower, and machines. Here's an example from the car industry. The material, metal in this case, is supposed to be reshaped by a machine. This machine, a press in our example, is operated by a machine operator. The metal thus becomes, through the transformation process, a finished component, which is assembled on a car as the output of this process. A central aspect of operations management is the improvement of the transformation processes, which can be accomplished by concepts such as total quality management, Kanban, or total productive maintenance.
So that was a short video which kind of, gives us a bit of a perspective in terms of what operations management is all about. I think it's quite clear that, we come across this term very frequently in our day-to-day lives. And what we tend to do is we get confused with the daily routine or daily functions that we carry out on a day-to-day basis within the office, maybe at home, or, at a workplace. Now, there are various functions that we get to see in the business, which we talk about, quite often, and they typically include, functions like business development, sales, marketing, finance, operations, engineering. Now, typically, when we look at, picking up the subject of operations management, what we do get to see is that we kind of, from when we wear the hat of looking at what are the various functions within the business, and from an operations management view, we look at basically three. So what we tend to do is we combine sales and marketing into one. We look at services or customer services, and then we look at, the key function of operations or management mixed with operations. The reason we do that in most cases is that when you look at a business or when you look at a social enterprise, what we do get to see is that most of them exist because they basically produce some goods and services, and these goods and services are then consumed or sold to customers or consumers, and then in return, what you get is certain, say some sort of return, which is in terms of either money, cash, profits, which is reinvested into the business. So when we look at this particular cycle and look at that introduction, which was provided by that video, which talks about input being transformed into output, but in between there is something which is the process which happens, and that bit of that process is operations management. So you look at sales and marketing, business development, all clubbed into one banner, which is mostly outward facing for an organization. And what they do is they bring in the business, but once the orders and the business comes in, the operations management, which could be engineering, which could be production, which could be administration, support functions, frontline functions, back-end functions, all clubbed together into operations management. They work on the, say, for example, a brief, or they work on the client, in terms of requirements, create a product, and then it is then sold or given back to services, to the consumer from which it's been received as a demand. And towards the end, what we see when the output is served, most of the departments which come into play in terms of managing that would be, people who are again front-facing, but predominantly in the domain of, customer services, because they are the ones which go in and install or maybe deliver the product, demonstrate the product. And at some stage, if there are issues and problems which come across on that, then it is dealt by the customer services or the department which predominantly provides support. So looking at the functions within a business, that is how we tend to kind of, group them together. But as over the years, we've moved from different phases, post the industrialization, the World War II era, then the industrialization. And now when we look at the businesses, which are millennial businesses or businesses, which are more or less, they involve a lot of intellectual property, outsourcing, products being made by, say, for example, Apple, which are designed, as they write, in California or by Apple and then manufactured in China. So all these things are basically giving operations management a broader focus and a broader function, but the whole aspect of operations still remains, in terms of looking at 3 or 4 variables, which is looking at bringing in efficiency, looking at increasing productivity, looking at serving more customers, saving costs, and also looking at the option of, how the business or the enterprise makes more profit. So it's a very key function within the organization. And when we look at different sectors, different locations, so you'll have a function of this or a variation of this happening within hospitals. When we look at NHS in particular, so you'll see a bit of operations management happening wherein they're trying to make it lean, mean, but also quite efficient and productive in terms of catering to, patients' demand. You look at car manufacturing, facility or a business in which they want to produce as many cars as possible during the shifts in which the workers are working. You see this in hospitality industry. You see this in technology, retail, financial services. So in all locations, in any side of business or any particular sector that we look into, we find that operation management, operations is basically a key function within the business, and it basically comprises of a set of activities which actually transforms input, raw material, it could be any form of input coming in, into some sort of products and services or goods and services, which is essentially nothing but the output. And that then allows the business to kind of realize money or, cash flows because of selling those products and services. Is that okay?
Yeah, right.
Now, what I've just briefly summarized, essential functions that we look at. So when we look at in different organizations, we have different connotations of these terms. But when we look at a large global organization, there is a marketing department, and that department primarily looks at creating demand. That means they do activities or a series of activities which basically create demand of their products from consumers. So, for example, when you look at Apple, they produce or come out with products once in every 2 or 3 years. Some of these products are quite revolutionary, but the whole idea is they study the market, do a lot of research, and then come out with something which they feel should be, which is what they produce as technology, and they kind of believe that they want to give it a real meaning wherein it makes difference in consumers' life. So when the iPhone came out or when the iPad came out, we look at some of these exceptionally good products which the company has brought out has actually changed the market. So the marketing department in a large organization like that essentially looks at creating demand. But if you look at a small business, there the word marketing might be interchanged and used interchangeably with business development, sales, because there again, this part of the function is looking at creating demand or sales, but primarily at a lower scale, wherein the investment into R&D, research, getting feedback from existing consumers, and then looking at creating a product. The product life cycle is quite shrinked into a number of smaller set of activities as against a larger set of activities in a large organization. So key functions do remain the same. We look at marketing, we look at operations and production, which is the function which creates the output products. And then we look at supporting functions or the functions which deal once the products or goods and services are available. They could be, customer services, finance, accounts, support, things like that. Now, just to give you an idea in terms of when we look at some of these slides, the idea is to try and give you a slight bit of a bird's eye overview in terms of how does the organizational chart look like when we look at, studying or spotting the functions of operations within, a particular type of organization. So here, what we're looking at is, if you look at a commercial bank, now in commercial bank, there are lots of things which happen. If you imagine a Barclays Bank or an outlet or a branch of Barclays Bank that you go to, what you will normally see is when you go through the door, you have somebody, if it's a large enough branch, you'll have somebody at the, just when you enter the door, he or she might kind of speak to you to find out what are you in today to do at the bank, might greet you, meet you. And if you're coming in to drop money, deposit money, or, they'll kind of guide you to go into different, different sections or different areas of the bank to be able to, do some of the functions. So it could be like, I go into a bank, I would look at primarily, say, depositing money. They would say, okay, if you do not want any other transaction to be done, you can pick up an envelope, put some money in, write it down, and drop it into that, and that will deposit within 2 hours. But if you're looking at doing other functions, like you want to withdraw money, get a statement, they might direct you to an automated terminal wherein you can get the statement, but if you are looking at speaking to someone, they might ask you to go in, obviously queue in and see a teller or maybe a person who's primarily going to be discussing some requirements with you. And then at some stage, if you look at some of the big banks, for example, if you look at the city center branch, some of them have other functions of, operations which they do and provide services, like they will have a mortgage section. They will have, a business manager who looks after managing loans or, requirements of large sums of monies like cash flow management and things like that. So there might be other functions in that. So when we look at a particular bank and we look at a particular branch, you will tend to see, depending on the size and the scale of operation of that branch, you might have different departments or different functions within that branch itself. Now, in larger branches, which are based in the city centers, you'll probably see somebody from marketing, somebody from investment banking, or somebody from business side of banking, and some part of the operations in the bank would include people who are actually on the teller, helping out the customers who come in to take out money from savings account, current account, and things like that. So all in all, when you structure that out, what you do get to see is that there are functions within the bank which will be looking at marketing, which is creating demand, and they are the ones which kind of feed into what kind of products and services would the company essentially sell or offer in the long term. Then there are some support functions which could be finance. So people, if you're coming in to withdraw large sums of money, you might have to, you go into the teller, you say, okay, I want to withdraw, say, £5,000, but I also want €1,000. They might do some checks with you, but ask you to sit down, and then somebody will go back into the back of the bank or back office, essentially, speak to the manager, get the currency arranged, and then come back and do that. So there are some administration or back-end or support functions as well, which might be present in the branch. But in most cases, you will see a majority of the functions which will help the branch to function effectively, would be employing the largest set of people, because at the end of the day, you're going to a local branch of your bank, hopefully in a location where you live. And the idea is you normally do day-to-day operations of banking, withdrawing the money, depositing the money, maybe, looking at depositing a check and things like that. And that is where the part of operations would typically happen. And you will see a large set of people working within that side of that side of the function, and that will primarily constitute operation. Things like the branch team will come in the morning, open the branch up, get the bank ready for operations. There'll be a few people who will go on a shift basis onto the teller positions, and then obviously somebody who manages the staff will be in the managerial position. You have security, a couple of other features, and that will tend to be the operations team. You might have a business manager, depending on the demand and the requirements. The business manager might come in and sit into the bank, for 2 to 3 hours during the busy operations time, and he or she might look at, dealing with some of the business customers who have accounts or do banking locally in that branch. So that's how a structure of a bank would look like. Let's look at airline. Having said that, you will, be able to correlate now is that in terms of when we look at the operational side of things here, if you visualize and imagine that you're going on a holiday and you are traveling to the airport and will catch a flight eventually, you will see maximum set of people actually working within the operations team. So things like ground staff, people who look at working in maintenance, operations, which is looking at starting from the counter when you check in your baggage, and at some stage, even within the flight, when you look at crew, when you look at people who are flying the plane, the pilot, when you look at the cabin crew, they will all be a part of the operations team. And in their case, because the airline has service counters or operations within different airports, the main head office would basically kind of have, the support functions or functions which provide support to the operational team and also to the front-end team, which are front-ending the transactions or dealing with customers directly. And at some place, obviously, in the head office, you'll have marketing team, a team which manages agents and, creates offers and, those kind of things. So look after sales and advertising or marketing with regards to, coming out with promotional offers and things like that. So the structures, the idea of showing these few slides is to try and get around the fact that the operations functions might vary slightly depending on the sector or the organization that you're looking at. But because this is a key department or a key function within any organization, you will tend to see that maximum number of people tend to be employed within within this particular the particular area of operations. And here they might be clubbed together depending on the size of the organization. You might have different departments, but they're all kind of categorized in a super category or all lumped up together into something called operations. But operations might, in big organizations, be classified as operations, might be as engineering, production, administration, reception. You'll break them up into different smaller departments or groupings, but essentially they are all a part and parcel of, the back end or backbone of the operations of a company, or the structure of the company, and that department primarily sums up as being something called the operations department. Last but not the least, let's look at manufacturing. We go across Tesco, Sainsbury's, we buy a lot of products. At some point in time, grocery, whatever it is, we do get to see that you tend to interact with a lot of people when you are in a retail store, and here you get to see maybe the nitty-gritty, and you're able to easily correlate the various functions which actually come together within the operations side to be able to run that particular store more effectively. So things like, if you go to a Tesco Extra store, which normally is open, longer hours and has different types of services it can offer, not just the food and grocery that you normally shop for, but things like clothing. They might have a cafe. It also has the ability to be able to serve telecom and IT or electrical products. And when you imagine that kind of a store, the general manager or the director of operations, as we would say, the person would be in that position. And when you look at his role will be to effectively manage a large team of 200, 300 people to be able to run the store efficiently on a day in, day out basis without having much customer complaints, but also ensuring that a lot of customers come in and shop. And at the same point in time, his role would be to also ensure that he is able to maximize the business by ensuring that, there are offers, prices, stocks available, and they're all up to date so that maximum number of customers can end up buying products, which could mean that, they could try and achieve as much sale as possible on a day in, day out trading basis. Is that something that you can correlate with?
Yeah, definitely. It's actually, we're obviously an education establishment, but it's really easy to see, because I'm part of the operations team, I suppose, it's quite easy to see how that fits into our establishment as well.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. I think when we look at taking the educational example, the bits that we will look at here is things like the business support, the business development, anything which would primarily be pre-admissions, say in a big, large FE college, anybody who's in the pre-admissions team, whether they look at, doing events like open days, or you look at, for example, administration, somebody who, after all those will be falling within the operational side of things, and they would have, obviously, in order to have a clear structure, we tend to divide them into smaller groupings or divisions, but large, if I have to look at from a, an overall perspective, that side of the things within an educational setup will primarily be, what I would say is operations. Now, obviously, we've looked at some of the reasons of why and how it is important, but why do we study operations management? Why is it important? Can you think of some reasons of why do you think operations management as a subject needs to be studied? Because part of it is, I think bits and pieces of this can be easily covered up when you look at other functions within the business, like marketing, finance, sales, business development, events, advertising. But why do you think we still look at this as a core?
I suppose because you can see how everything kind of interlinks together as well. So, for example, here, our HR department is quite closely linked to the finance department because of things like payroll, that kind of thing. Our student admin records department, again, is quite closely linked with finance and HR, and everything sort of fits together to be part of the whole operations. You couldn't have a marketing department without a finance department. You couldn't have it anywhere without a HR sort of somebody looking after that kind of thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the key things which these departments would look at managing would be that one would be that they would look at ensuring that the things which is in terms of, say, let's look at HR that you mentioned, human resources. Now they play a key role in ensuring that the staff which works within different functions and carries out various roles and responsibilities has the deliverables to be able to perform and do their role well. So obviously they as a department work hand in hand and very closely with account and finance. They will also work very closely with administration to ensure that some of these key set of deliverables which are required for us to be able to function effectively are easily available. But these side of things, if I translate them into what they actually do and deliver, they will be actually doing and delivering things, as you rightly said, to make things available easily. And the output of their work essentially will constitute something called operations. So if the HR does out, say for example, HR does 3-4 key responsibilities across the year, they might carry out appraisals. They look at training and development. They will also look at maintaining, say, payroll and other things in conjunction with the accounts department. But their output primarily will constitute input for other departments to be able to run it as operations. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that is where I think the reason why even within the HR, when they have to function, they will have to write out some processes or some policies which will effectively consistently define what the department does and how it does that particular thing. Say, for example, if the appraisals have to be done every year with the line manager, department manager, or the persons involved, they will need to write out a policy. And that policy is nothing but an operational kind of a document which you refer to as a template. And then you sit down and you go through the process of appraisal, you take some notes, write it down, and the action points coming out of it would be, you've done this well, not done this well, you've done this okay, and you need a bit of training and development on this. And those are the outputs which are coming out of that appraisal as an activity, as a process. So yes, there is operations within each of the departments within an organization. So HR would also have their policies and procedures, but when they put them into practice, that is what they are operating with. That is what they are trying to bring into action, and that will constitute operations for them. But if I look at a manufacturing organization, the operations essentially would be bringing in the raw material because they are producing physical goods and services. But in the case of HR, these services some of them might be intangible, they might not be physical goods and services. So that is where the operational part of things will be the putting into or enacting into putting things into action, which are the policies and procedures. But when you look at a different set of an organization like manufacturing, you will see physical, output being produced, which is in raw material being produced into something which then can be physical, tangible, and then sold as services to, customers.
So I suppose the way you're looking at our input and output would be the input is the student intake that we get in a way, and then the operations is all the work that we do with them, whether that be in the back office or the teaching, obviously. The output is when the students take their exams and pass, and that's how we draw our funding down. So the better we do, the more funding we get, and the more profitable the establishment is.
Absolutely, and I think I totally agree with that. So I think from a educational and teaching perspective, I was shying away from taking that example because I wanted to have a bit of a different approach. But yeah, you brought it out absolutely, on the spot. Is that yes, when you get learners coming into the college, they are coming in as primarily as input. There's a processing which is done, which you rightly said, in the form of teaching and learning. and they achieve that qualification, and when they achieve that qualification is essentially but an output. So yeah, in a way that is definitely operations from an educational perspective that you put across, and yeah, that's fine. Now, just to give you an idea, in the next few slides, I'm just going to run through some of the slides, but here is an option, here is a slide which basically talks about options of how, and which department looks at putting in what contribution. So when I look at, a lot of organizations undertaking an activity which is like, they want to look at cost cutting, they want to look at operational efficiency, which is a word or a term which is used, then what you do get to see is that there are cuts, or there are operations, or functions which are going to be streamlined to make them more effective, to make them kind of, as we say, the idea is to stretch the pound, to try and get as more as possible from them. So when you look at this particular activity happening, and one of the terms which our Chancellor used in the budget was productivity, and that is something which is related to operations management. And in larger organizations, this is kind of a term which is used much more frequently, because at the end of the day, what they want to look at is, if you're drawing X amount of resources, it could be wages, salaries, whatever, and apart from that, the input which is required for you to be able to function, what they would want to know is how much of productivity that you are able to get from that person. Or if you put in 5 people to do a job, what is the kind of operational efficiency or productivity that you can get. So these are some different terms that we will come to, but a slide here which basically shows that sometimes when you look at increasing the contribution of which department does what and how much and what they bring in is basically kind of depicted on this slide. So it talks about, if you have a sales and you calculate the margins that you want to achieve on those sale of those products. So how does that cost get broken up into the marketing cost, the finance and operational or accounting cost, and then the last bit, which is operational cost. So operational cost would be looking at making the product from the raw material. Financial and the other cost would be to do with the cost which is what we called is the overheads, which is costs of salaries and things like that, which is basically supportive or support cost, which is required to be added to the base cost at which the product is manufactured. And then on top of it, you add marketing, sales, advertising, packaging, those kind of costs, and then you reach a gross profit. So sometimes what you get to see is, from a management perspective, when you look at a balance sheet or when you look at a cost sheet, what you tend to do is you tend to kind of quickly calculate. The idea of giving and showing the slide is you tend to quickly calculate that if I'm going to do this activity, and there's a predicted set of results which could be achieved, what is the cost of bringing in that business? Or you might say that if I'm going to advertise, the cost of advertisement is going to be, say, 5,000, and the number of copies going to be printed is 90,000, and that has a shelf life of 3 days. What you might do as a person in management see is that what is the opportunity cost of doing that particular advert, and what kind of business it would bring out. So what you do is you tend to quickly skim through it and look at the 3 basic costs. One is cost of production, which is the advertising agency, the cost of creative. You will look at the cost of doing the insertion, which is giving the cost to the publication. And at some stage, what you will calculate is, okay, we've spent this much money. I think we'll have to spend a bit more money to try and put some program around it. But in the end, will it bring us the desired results? And that is where sometimes people in the management positions kind of, look at the cost and they say, okay, if I'm doing something like this, I think I'll put about 30% of the cost as operational cost, 20% into sales and marketing, and about 30% into production. And I need to achieve 20% gross profit. That is how they would look at when they start something. So when you put a new setup together, the owners or the investors would look at, okay, we are looking at 25% gross profitability. I know there will be manpower costs or, cost of salaries and other bits and pieces, which is administration. We'll put it at 30%. The balance 30% would be the cost of sales and marketing for the first year, but it'll keep reducing. And that percentage helps them understand where the manpower will go in, which side of departments or activities will require more manpower and more overheads to be able to, manage this side of the activities. And that is how sometimes you look at costs. And when you look at it from this bird's eye view, what you're trying to do is you're trying to always look at operational costs which are going to be spread across a point in time, over a period of time, and they are going to be consistently occurring costs. So what sometimes they do is, okay, if I stop marketing and I want to save some money, what they do is they cut off the marketing budget for a quarter or so, and those costs are costs which they can save, pretty much directly. You can't look at shaving off operational costs because that involves laying off staff or you're making people redundant. You cannot play with any other costs in terms of support functions. Is you might end up reducing a few headcounts, but that would still mean the costs on that side might end up, compromising the services that you're able to provide to customers. So operational cost is calculated in businesses by looking at this particular approach. And what sometimes people in management do is they kind of have to look at the project. They say, okay, can you divide the cost into three broad functions, which is operations, sales and marketing, and then support costs, or the cost of production essentially. And that is how they can do, look at this as an approach. Is that okay?
Yes.
Good stuff. Now, apart from that, let's look at briefly what are the various types of, functions that you will find in management and which are related to operations. So people who are in the planning role, organizing role, staffing role, leading role, or controlling role will all be essentially, people within the management. Would you tend to agree with that?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
Okay. Now, when we look at the types of jobs which you will find in operations management, what kind of...
I've actually got this printed out.
Sorry?
I've actually got the slides printed out as well, so I can see it without...
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So what do you see in that case, the kind of jobs that you will tend to see within operations management when we look at, in particular this? What do you see, what kind of roles or jobs that you will get to see in operations management?
In our environment?
Yeah, in your environment in particular, yes.
So we would have a marketing manager, because obviously we still need to market our college.
Yeah.
We want students to choose us. We would have HR, as I've mentioned, finance, administration, dealing with student records, attendance, that kind of thing. And then in each of those areas has a manager.
Yeah.
And then you've got your teaching side, which is kind of separate. And again, they're all split within teams by subject, and then they would all have a manager as well. So I suppose they would still become part of the operation because they're actually doing the teaching on the ground, sort of thing.
Sure. So I think in that side, you're absolutely spot on. Here, what you're looking at primarily is the kind of jobs or roles which essentially you will see people having within an educational setup. And this will more or less not vary drastically, but these kind of functions, when we look at within operations, you'll have, say for example, if I have to just look at taking another example, would be say, let's look at say McDonald's, for example, or you look at Subway, for example. What you will see is that within that particular a business, you will primarily see people within the operational side. When you go into a store, people who are actually serving the customers, making the product, which is say for example you've ordered a burger or something like that. Those are the ones which will be within the food and quality side of things, will be preparing the meals, and then somebody at the customer service serving it to you. But they'll all be part of more or less the operations side of things. This particular slide talks about, the type of job functions which you will get to see. So within the operations management, you will see, people who are working within the technology sector, facilities management. There are people who will be looking after strategic issues in particular, and that will also be classed as, operational management, because when you look at production facilities, there are managers who are continuously looking at saving time, or looking at less wastage, and they work on those strategic issues which will essentially help the company save money. And that is why some of these jobs will also be classed as jobs wherein people work within the operations management but look after only strategic issues. At response time, in sometimes when you look at call centers, when you look at, for example, when you're on a drive-through in McDonald's or KFC, you see response times are important from the time you order your meal and by the time you come up to the second counter after making the payment. They want the food to be served, because if you are not able to maintain those response time, it can lead to queues and customers getting frustrated. You'll also see people working within the team and team development or training and organization side of things, because their role is to provide training and development to people so that they are effectively able to do their jobs, and they will also be classified as people working and supporting the operation function. You have customer care, quality, cost reduction, inventory reduction, and obviously productivity improvement. Now, productivity improvement is something which will definitely come in and involve a couple of departments. So there will be departments like HR to a certain extent which will get involved, technology or IT department which will get involved, and in some cases, if you look at a manufacturing example, you will see that the engineering department, the line manager at the production floor, these kind of people also get involved, because they do get to see that if we are able to improve productivity, that means increase the output. I'm not going to use the word efficiency here because that has a different connotation with regards to operations. But when we look at increasing the output, would lead to, in the same amount of time, if I'm able to increase the output or decrease the wastage of the raw material, that would also involve jobs which basically look at, productivity improvement. And there are a lot of organizations like Facebook, Google today. What they do is, the reason why they want to look at, say, flexible working from home or, flexi times in terms of working, is because they want the staff to be more productive. Even if they work 5 to 6 hours a day, they want the work to be done rather than looking at you working for a number of hours against which you're paid. So the patterns are shifting, and this is something that we'll look at in the subsequent slides. But these are the kind of jobs we get to see which are now coming across in various, with various sectors, and people are, classified as part of operations team when they are picking up these kind of roles within any organization. Now, if you look at these next 2-3 slides, what we are looking at primarily understanding is that how was this concept looked at in the past, what were the reasons why they are changing, and how we are seeing them shape up for future. So when you look at, in the past, operations management only focused on, was primarily a subject or an issue of study in large or national or public sector organizations. But because the shift has happened and you've seen a lot of public-private sector partnerships now happening, and private sector becoming a large employer post the industrialization and, obviously the 70s and 80s, what we do get to see, the companies are having more, the focus is not national. Most of the large corporations have gone global. That means they have business in different countries. They trade with, or they produce goods and services and sell in different countries. So here the focus is global. And when we look at global focus, they are looking at saving costs, building in efficiency, increasing productivity, buying or selling products, essentially buying raw material at a cheaper price, and then selling it at a higher price to make more profit. So these trends have basically looked at the focus moving from local, national to global. And because it has allowed them to do outsourcing, when we look at the terms like, business process outsourcing or outsourcing in general. An example here would be Primark, for example. Most of the manufacturing for Marks and Spencer, H&M, up until the 90s was done within the UK. But as and when, liberalization, globalization happened, and we had access to cheaper markets or labor outside, what has happened after that is some of these companies manufacture products globally, but they sell, because their businesses are also global, they also sell these products globally, and that is where they're able to, shift the definition of operations management. And the definition has actually changed over the years in the sense of operations that they are doing. So we also look at, say, for example, when you look at coffee, production of coffee is being produced in different countries like South America, Africa, and then the finished product is sold on the retail shelves. And when we look at that, that involves extensive supply chains. So what has happened is, because there is there are resources and there are monies being spent from procurement till production and finally sales at the retail counter. In order to achieve efficiencies, what has happened is a lot of these large coffee plantations are dealing directly with buyers, and they're doing away with intermediaries. And the reason why they're doing it is that they want to kind of streamline and reduce costs, make more profits, but also streamline the whole process of growing the coffee bean, to selling it, to processing it, selling it, and finally selling it in the retail to the end customer. And that is where the efficiencies are coming across, because the definitions are changing. There are no longer a lot of intermediaries in the middle, and that tends to then reduce the life cycle for the product from being manufactured to being sold on the shelf in retail. Now, some of these trends are, kind of looked at because they are also in demand because of the way the consumer demand is shaping up. So if you look at an example of Apple that we took, what we did get to see when the first iPhone came out, what we did get to hear in the interviews was that the development product life cycle, it took about 5 or 6 years for Steve Jobs to come out with that product. But as we have seen, and today within 10 years, we've had 10 different iterations of the iPhone. What we've seen is that the product life cycle has become shorter because the product is widely accepted. The company is no longer taking a large calculated risk, but because the product has a traction with consumers and has become immensely successful, what that has meant is that the companies have had to shape up and reduce, their, kind of shorten their life cycles of introducing products, and they are to a certain extent under pressure to launch a new phone every year. And that has led to the development of, the shortening the product cycle, rapid development of new products or new features coming into the same product. And in that case, in order to meet customer expectations, what Apple and companies like Apple are also doing is they're also buying out companies with technologies rather than, producing or looking at innovating and bringing that technology from in-house. They are looking at, kind of taking over companies, and that has all led to changes happening in the definition of how operations are being managed, or what is the significance and how the significance of operations management is actually growing within, all types of organization, big, small, global, multinational organizations, all changing. Now, let's look at one of the last things which I want to look at today is, say, for example, in this particular topic is, now what these trends that we've studied in these 2-3 slides are being summarized here. Now, why do you think this new trend is coming in operations management? Is because most companies, because the policies which the governments are setting, and because we are a part of a large, kind of, let's put it this way, large, say, an example here would be UK is a part of EU. Obviously, we are coming out of the EU, but, because as trading blocks were built, and some of these organizations which came across, like the World Trade Organization, the European Union, and obviously all these agreements which were done, the idea was that because the businesses became big, and some of the sourcing of the raw material for these businesses or for the products that they produced was being done from other countries, there were a lot of barriers which were removed between the 70s to the 90s in terms of change of policies. And that meant that any organization which was looking at growing, looking at selling their products and services, not just locally, but also abroad, had to put in or had to take in something into their strategy. And, rather than look at just local, they had to kind of focus on a global perspective. And this change from local to global perspective meant that in terms of their operations, they had also to kind of move that part of their organization to kind of gear up to global operations. So an example here would be when you look at, this is something that we should have looked at earlier, but just as an example here, when you look at IKEA, you've been to IKEA?
Yeah.
And when you look at IKEA, and when we go across to some of the other retailers which sell furniture, for example, DFS and Furniture Village and things like that, that we are aware of, or some of the other national brands. But when just as a bit of a survey which was done, now most of the other retailers which are as prestigious or are as valuable as the IKEA brand, they also produce great products. But what did come across in a study was that when you look at some of the other stores and when you compare their footfall and the numbers which IKEA gets is massively different. When you look at some of the other stores, people go in there, they are there for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But when you look at the number of hours people spend within IKEA, that is in excess of 2 hours. You look at the business which IKEA is able to generate, even though their stores are outwards or outside major cities or towards the outskirts of city centers or major locations, they still are able to get a tremendous amount of footfall, which drives in a lot of traffic. Now, when you look at that, the reasons why they kind of have been successful as against some of the others, which sell maybe much more better quality of furniture or maybe much more traditional type of furniture as against IKEA, is because when they
isn't it just ready to take off the shelf?
That is correct, yeah. So some of the things which IKEA put into practice when it started off as a business in Sweden, and the person actually who started this off created one of its first stores in the outskirts of city by taking taking up space which was cheap, the rentals were low, and he came up with the idea of producing flat pack furniture. He had done a bit of research already to see that what are the drawbacks of traditional furniture retailers, and he started off this as an initiative. But when we look at the operations going global, and they have more than now 300 stores in I think 18 plus countries, we do get to see that they have created a business of its own. And this is a signature example which is taken in operations management, is because when you look at a large store like IKEA, it's like a mall itself, and you still have so many people within. You have a lot of people which are coming to the store. They have lots of products under the roof, and there is lots and lots of people who are actually serving the customers who are coming to the stores. And there is where the focus when he set up the business was that in the 1970s, when he started off in Sweden, he basically looked at creating a store within the country to look at providing something as an alternative. But when the business was being expanded globally, they looked at a detailed study to understand what are the key things which are the weaknesses of other businesses will have to be transformed into strengths or advantages at IKEA, and that's how the whole planning of the business was done. So creation of large warehouses or superstores, as they call it, was done. It was planned out in the outskirts of the city wherein parking was available. They created play areas for children because they wanted to create it as an activity wherein families could come in. Decision making on the furniture, which happens, you buy furniture not very frequently. You buy furniture once in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or when you buy a new home, things like that. So they looked at all these parameters, and then they put together a model in place which works operationally brilliantly. And the reason why they did that was they looked at incorporating a lot of key things which they felt were going to be a part of business and will help in kind of streamlining operations or streamlining activities, as they say, within the store. So these things, when they looked at, there were things like just in time. That means this is a Japanese concept which was borrowed from Toyota, wherein if the production is happening, the material or the raw material was made available just in time, so that it did not, it helped basically save inventory costs. It helped in saving costs for storage, and also meant that whatever was being brought in was actually being sold in a particular or assembled in a particular point in time, in order to minimize costs for shelving and storage. So these kind of things which we look at as trends are going to be some individual terms that we will study further in this unit, and they will be terms like just in time, supply chain partnering, rapid product development. That means product life cycles have shortened, so they think of a product and they have to bring it out to the market, because Before you think of it, somebody else would be thinking of it. And if you are late in bringing that idea to the market from, say from a sketch or a drawing board to reality, then somebody else walks away with that opportunity. They looked at something called mass customization, and this is something which has driven sales in IKEA for a number of years now, and they are one of the most premium and most successful furniture retailers in the world. And then what they also did was, because their side of operations was essentially dependent on staff, dependent on people serving people, people helping people, they brought in a model wherein they looked at empowering employees to ensure that the operations side of things, or the activities or the processes which had to be managed, were within the control, and quicker decision making would happen. So that is where empowerment of employees was done. And then also what they looked at was, they also addressed some of the other bits and pieces which were becoming important as trends from past to the future trends, things like environmental friendly, recycling, corporate ethics, and things like that. And they are the new trends which are now coming into any business that you do when we look at the operational side of things. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good stuff. Now, in the subsequent slides, what I've done is primarily put some examples of how productivity is calculated and why productivity is important, because it is a term which is related to operations management. And here, it refers to obviously the output which is received or which is created when you put some input in terms of, capital, labor, or, anything which is required to produce a particular product. So if I look at a car manufacturing facility, they have a lot of raw material coming in, but finally it's put together by robots or, automated welding, whatever it happens, engine, everything side of things going in, but it requires human intervention to be able to produce a finished product. So that is a cost. Raw material which is required for production is a cost. So the idea which most car companies are looking at doing and following when they look at the Japanese car manufacturers is, they are looking at increasing productivity, they are looking at shaving off time, they're looking at shaving off costs, and that is where the concept of productivity essentially, comes in. And productivity, it's important to know, and I mentioned earlier that production is not, is related to output, but efficiency has a different meaning when we talk about it in the context of operations in particular. So this is where an example, has been given. The output of 2.5% is not true for the UK market, because I think it was revised downwards by OECD to 1.6 or 1.7%. But it gives you an idea that when we look at GDP, for example, in the economic system, we look at input. We look at, if we have a bad day and there's excessive snowfall, and if businesses are not able to function, it leads to a cost which is, production costs or losses for businesses because of inactivity on a particular day. So when we remember, I think the last time it kind of snowed heavily and we were, affected by that, the snowstorm. I think it was 2010-11 when we looked at that in the Northwest. And what we did get to see that employees were not able to reach the office, and obviously businesses suffered. We had to take, a day off or things like that, and that led to a productivity loss of 1 billion pounds for that particular day as an economy, and that because it affects the GDP. So here, if we look at that big example and we divide it into why it is considered as a cost, would be things like input costs, which is labor, people who are involved in, obviously working, and the output which it produces as a country. So that is where we say, you go in, you work number of hours, you get paid for it, but the productivity in general for the 33 million people who are employed ends up producing a value. And that value, if you're not able to work on a particular day, or it's affected in working, leads to a particular output, which is a loss. So that's explained in the form of an economic system here. And there are ways and means that I've put up some examples primarily to look at how sometimes organizations look at, improving productivity costs. So if you look at Subway or Starbucks or any such place where we go and have fast food, what you will see is sometimes most of these businesses get a lot of walk-ins and customers coming in during lunchtime or during in the evenings or early mornings. So they have to effectively manage the queues in order to not lose business. And here, in the process side of things, if you order a Subway and you want something, for example, a veggie delight or whatever, it takes a certain amount of time to produce that. And there are people within the business who study them as strategists or people who strategically study that process to see where all they can look at reducing time. Saving 2 seconds here, 2 seconds here would mean that you'll be ending up serving so many customers. And that is all related to something called productivity. You order a coffee at Starbucks, and what they have done over the years is they have looked at calculating the cost of serving coffee to each customer. And if you are able to shave off some time or save some time, essentially, in the process of serving coffee to customers, it helps you increase productivity, and it helps that same person do more in the amount that you're paying for that person, and that increases at the end of the day. If you look at it for the whole day and the month and the year, it helps in increasing that business. So Starbucks, as an improvement program to kind of make the business or a particular outlet more efficient, they looked at strategically studying it, and over a point in time, they were able to save or increase revenues, whichever way you look at it. Either you increase revenue or you kind of save that time to serve more customers, ended up increasing productivity and ended up increasing overall profits for the company. So these are some examples which are given, which I would suggest that you go through it just to understand the various concepts and terms within operations management. Is that okay? So I've put in some backup slides just to show some calculations of how this is done. But I think if you look at understanding these slides, from a productivity concept, that should be, good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, just very briefly switching over to another window and relating to what we've actually covered today. So if I look at the unit overview, the unit specification, what we've done is today we've looked at covering learning outcome 1, which talks about understanding the role of operations and what kind of roles, operations, where does the function actually sit in within the organization, and then to a certain extent we understand what kind of roles or job responsibilities are involved within the operations side of things. What we've also looked at is why the operation side of things are looked at from a point of view of costs. When the streamlining of functions have to be done, costs have to be saved. How do we put this in a bit of a perspective when we look at putting a value to it? And the idea is to understand how operations actually supports the back end of the business or becomes the backbone of the business in terms of supporting the strategic vision of why the business was set up and how the business achieves that. So that's essentially what we've covered in the first learning outcome, and that should give you some idea in terms of let's put it this way, with the example that we've taken, say for example the example of Apple, we've looked at a bit of IKEA, Starbucks, Subway, how and where are the discussions that you have within the business to see where operations is happening and where the costs can be saved, times can be reduced, productivity can be increased, and in what side of things people actually work on within the business. Is that okay?
Yeah, fine.
Right. What I'm going to do is, apart from that, I'm going to send you a bit of a handout, which is for you to read. This will essentially talk about some of the things that we've discussed and will be like a bit of expansion of the PowerPoint slides. And this handout is about 8 to 10 pages, but gives you in a short summary what is the importance of operations management, the functions, why do we need to understand this, the example of IKEA that we wanted to understand, and how they've become very successful furniture retailer from a context of doing some of the tasks like 1.1 and 1.2, wherein you'll be able to use the theory that we have covered and then look at a bit of application, and then towards the end an example of IKEA.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm just. So that should be absolutely fine, and I'll email that to you just after the session.
Great, that's wonderful, thank you.
Good stuff. And we'll catch up, on this next week, same time. Then we'll end up going through, I'll have some, if you have any questions, I'll take those questions up. And at the same point in time, what we'll do is we'll start learning outcome 2.
Okay. So from now then, after leaving this, if I read that handout that you're sending to me and I carry on with the slides, looking at the calculations and stuff, have I to start writing my assignment now, or am I not ready to do that just yet?
I think what I would suggest is there is an assignment brief which is on Moodle, which is given. If you want to look at it, yes, you can start to look at learning outcome 1 and some of the tasks which are kind of associated with that. You can definitely start to dwell into it.
Okay.
Which is this particular document, Unit 5.34 essay.
SA. Yeah, that's the one.
Essay basically stands for sample assignment, so that's the one.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Rahman.
Thanks, Simone. I'll catch up with you next week. You have a good weekend. Thanks.
You too. Bye.
Bye.